Hello, second grade friends, and welcome to Number Corner. For Number Corner today, we will be working with arrays in our daily rectangle. Here's what you will need. You will need a whiteboard, marker, and eraser for this activity. You can pause the video now to get what you need. Let's get started. Now I want you to look at the next page I'm going to show you. I want you to think about what you notice right here in this square. What are you noticing? Now, you may have noticed a few different things. You may have noticed that in this big square, there are a lot of little squares. You may also have noticed that there's some lines in the middle. There's a vertical line that goes up and down, and a horizontal line that goes across. And they're a little bit darker than the rest of the lines. Now, you may have noticed a few other things too. Now, I want you to think now about how many small squares you see in this picture on this grid. We're looking at a grid. How many small squares do you see? Show a connection if you think there's just maybe too many to count one by one. Yeah, there's a lot. I didn't really give you enough time to count all of them. So I want you to think, what's a good way you could figure out how many squares are on this grid? Instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how could we count these? Now, one strategy you might have used was to count each row at a time. I can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares in my bottom row. Well, if there's 10 squares in my bottom row, there must be 10 squares in every row because this is an array. So I can count 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Show a connection if you counted 100 squares. Great work. Now you could have counted it in a different way. You may have noticed these lines in the middle going across and up and down. We talked about those before. They also help us to break up our grid into different parts. Now we could count each little section on their own to find the answer too. You also could have counted your columns up and down and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to count all the way across, just like we did counting up. Those are some really good strategies. Now that we know that there are 100 small squares on this grid, I'm going to show you something a little bit different. I'm going to show you another grid, just like this one, but I'm going to shade some of the squares gray. I will only show you this for a couple of seconds, and I want you to try to make an estimate or a really good guess of how many gray squares there are. Thumbs up if you're ready. Let's have a look. I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, how many do you think were gray? Now, you may have been thinking, well, it looked like there was a little more than half colored in. So maybe there's 60? That's a little more than half, because half of 100 is 50. Well, maybe you're thinking, no, I think it was a lot more than half, like almost all of it. Maybe there were like 80 shaded in. Show a connection if you're thinking maybe 80 squares. 60 squares? Anybody thinking less than 50? Show a connection. Well, is there a fast way that we can figure it out? Now, if you're thinking, well, we could use some of the strategies we just talked about, give yourself a big pat on the back. Yes, we can. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But first, I want to show you a little trick. Now, I want you to notice that I divided this grid by those heavy lines we talked about in the middle. And I made them pink for us to see a little better. I also broke these parts up into what we call a quadrant. That's a little section. Now I'm going to label each of them so we know which one we're talking about when. First, we're going to talk about quadrant A and count how many there are right here. Then B, then C, then D. So let's go ahead and get out those whiteboards and start to count how many squares are in each quadrant. Get your whiteboards out. You should have them right by you already. Now let's work on quadrant A only. And I want you to write an expression to represent the number of squares. Think about how you could write an expression or an equation like we did when we played the rows and columns game. What could you write? Let's have a look at an expression you may have written down. Now, you may have looked at this and seen each row. And you may have said, wow, if I count again, I know that there are 5 squares in my bottom row, plus another 5 in my second row, plus 5, plus 5, plus 5. So you may have written this expression. You can count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 to find your answer. Thumbs up if you got 25. Great work. You could have written this another way too. Now, when we see 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, well, we know we're really looking at 5 groups of 5. So you may have written something like this. 5 times 5 equals 25. Show a thumbs up if you think that that's really the same thing. Yeah, I should see a lot of thumbs up. It is the same thing. 5 times 5 equals 25. It's the same answer as 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. 5 groups of 5. Let's look at the next one. We have quadrant A. Let's look at quadrant B. Erase those whiteboards. Can you write an expression to say how many gray squares are in quadrant B? You may have written an expression that looks like this. 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 15. Because if I look at my rows again, I see one row of 3 plus another row of 3 and another and another and another. Well, that's my 5 groups of 3. And that equals 15. There's another way you could write that too. Let's look at our columns. Now, we could have seen a column of 5, plus a column of 5, plus a column of 5. Show a connection if that's what you saw. Yeah, and we know 5, 10, 15. We could have written that in a different way too, just like this. 3 times 5 equals 15. Here's my first group of 5. Here's my second group of 5. And my third group of 5. Erase your boards. Let's look at quadrant C. Can you write an equation to find out how many gray squares are in quadrant C? Now you may have written something that looks like this. I see 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15. Now that's really reminding me of what I saw in quadrant B. I see my first group of 5 down here. Another group of 5 is 10. Another group of 5 is 15. We could have written this in a different way, too. We could have used that new multiplication symbol of 5 times 3, because we can also see that we have one group of 3 and 2 groups of 3, 3 groups of 3, 4 groups of 3, 5 groups of 3. 5 times 3 equals 15. Erase your boards. Let's have our last quadrant, Quadrant D. Can you write an expression to represent Quadrant D? Now, if you're looking at our rows and columns, you may have written something that looks like this. Either way we look at this one, if we're looking at our rows or columns, we'll see 3 on our bottom row, 3 on our next row, and 3 on the top row. Well, I know that 3 plus 3 is 6, plus another 3 is 9. You may also have looked at them in groups, and you may have written something like this, that we have 3 groups of 3. Even if I look at it the other way, I see 1, 2, 3 groups of 3 to equal 9. Now that we have all of our different quadrants added up, let's add them together. Okay, now we need to take each one and add them together. Remember, quadrant A had 25, B had 15, C had 15, and D had 9. Use your strategies on your whiteboard to show me how you can add these numbers together. You may want to use an open number line. You may want to draw pictures. You may want to use the splitting strategy. You may want to stack your numbers. Choose your strategy. Solve the problem. Let's have a look at one of the ways you may have used. Now, you may have known that 15 plus 15 is a double. You may have known that that equals 30. You may also have known that if you kind of split up 25, you have a 20 and a 5. Well, now I know I can add 20 and 20 to equal, or 20 and 30 to equal 50. Plus another 5, 50, plus 5 equals 55. And now I need to add my 9. Well, if I break up 9, I can break it up into 5 and 4. 55 plus 5, is 60. Plus another 4 is 64. So you may have used a strategy similar to that to get our answer of 64. We've learned many other strategies. Any one you use is excellent to get the answer of 64. Your job is to remember how many squares we have in all so you can tell your teacher in our seesaw activity. They want to know that you're taking the time every day to watch these videos, learn some math with me, and then show them what you've learned. Great work today, second grade friends. I'll see you next time for Number Corner.